Hey, welcome back to Doug Badger Radio, broadcasting live out of the Twin Cities, over on Blog Talk Radio and over on Ustream. And we're going to be joined by Gary Burge. Gary's the author of a book called Jesus and Jewish Festivals. We're going to chat with him about that book and about why that stuff is important. And calling Gary now. This is live radio, so Gary knows we're calling. He's going to be a part of the program. And I think he's glad to be, but we should ask him that when he answers the phone.
Hello.
Hey, Gary, Doug Pagitt.
Hey, Doug, can you hear me okay?
I sure can, yeah. Hey, thanks so much for being...
I started on this. This book is a part, actually, of a larger series.
Mm-hmm.
There are 6 books which work together as a series. I've written 4 of them, and 2 I edited. But what I discovered, Doug, over the last, 8 or 9 years, is that when we are explaining the Gospels to average Christians in the church, they don't really have the kind of cultural background which they need to understand things, to gain insights to things. So, for instance, the biblical world comes out of a geography that is so different than what we have in Illinois or in Minnesota. And therefore the first book talks about how the land itself, the physical land, shaped the spirituality of God's people.
Interesting, yeah.
Anyway, yeah, so I've done one on the parables, I've done one on encounter stories, and where people actually meet Jesus, and then you have the drama of their meeting in a village. And so I describe the cultural things presupposed in a story like that. But the current book, the last one, the 6th book in the series, is called Jesus and the Jewish Festivals. And what I try to show in this book is that Jesus' world was filled with festivals, just like our world is filled with festivals. But generally, people inside of their culture don't think about their festivals quite so much.
Right, yeah, right.
An example would be, the American festival cycle pretty much is anchored by one festival, and it's Christmas. So Christmas begins around November 1st, I think now, and ends somewhere around January 15th, probably. But it's a heavy weight in our calendar. But you go back a few centuries, and Christmas was less, and Easter was more. We have Thanksgiving, we have minor festivals like Labor Day and so forth. But oftentimes we don't really think about what the origin of our festivals would be. Take Halloween as a great example. The average American thinks about it as a costume Mardi Gras event where children are out on the street getting candy.
Right, and you get to meet your neighbors or something and go up to their door and act funny.
Yeah, that's all they know about it. But actually it has amazing roots that go into the church with All Saints' Day. So we just don't know much sometimes about our own festivals. Now, if that's true of us, think about what happens if you go back 2,000 years into a foreign culture such as Jesus' culture. His world also was filled with festivals. The Jewish calendar has a rich array of amazing festivals.
So there might be people who are familiar with like Passover as a festival because that's connected to our current Easter. How many festivals did you write about in the book Jesus and the Jewish Festivals?
Well, what I did is I tried to comb through the Gospels and I analyzed where is it that a story in the Gospels presupposes the use of a festival.
Nice, yeah.
And the first one, for instance, that I do is Sabbath. That is a weekly festival for Judaism, and it's really vital to Jewish identity. So what I try to do is explain in the book, well, how did you practice the Sabbath if you lived in Jesus' day? And how is it that Jesus is practicing the Sabbath, and where does he disagree with some of those practices? But I go in from there, and I talk about Passover, I talk about the Festival of Tabernacles, I talk about Pentecost. So what I try to do is sort of unmask what these hidden secrets are inside of the Gospels. The Gospels, the Jewish calendar actually had 3 major pilgrimage festivals inside of it. Passover in the spring, followed 7 weeks later by Pentecost, and then in the fall, you had the great Festival of Tabernacles that celebrated the end of the harvest. Jesus shows up at these, and he has something to say about them. Jesus even shows up at a minor festival in the wintertime after Tabernacles called Hanukkah. And in John chapter 10, we actually have Jesus giving commentary on Hanukkah.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The catch is that we as Christians 2,000 years later, we read these stories like John 10, and we don't even understand that there's a festival looming over it.
Right. So that's the context in which everyone in that, who either in the narrative of the story or the early readers would have assumed, oh boy, to say that at the time of Hanukkah or the time of the Passover,
Right.
or the festival of the fruits, that would have been that would have added extra meaning to the or maybe cast the meaning in a whole new way.
Oh, absolutely. It is no accident that Jesus is at this Hanukkah festival, and he's talking about shepherds. I am the great shepherd. That is not a statement that stands by itself.
Right.
It's a statement which is anchored inside of a festival. When Jesus steps into Jerusalem and he says, I am the light of the world, or he says, if you are thirsty, come to me and drink, these are all provocative statements that are actually playing off the festival celebrations all around him.
So Gary, why do you think it is? Why do you think it?
Go ahead.
Let me ask you. Why do you think it is that in an age of incredible access to information, right? We live in the information age, and many people in North America have access to information. Why do you think it is that so many people's version of Christianity doesn't include this kind of contextual understanding? Like why does a book like yours strike people as so fresh?
Right.
Like how is it because people in certain streams of Christianity want to speak as if what they're describing is like on a straight line from the mouth of Jesus, and they're saying the same thing, and there's kind of a sameness to the gospel of the first century and the 21st century, and there's no need for all this funny cultural business? Or
right, exactly. And I think it's exactly right, Doug. And I think what the average Christian fails to realize is that Jesus' life is embedded in its own culture.
Right. And
I live in a different culture. And therefore, I can't expect that I'm going to understand everything about the nuances of his culture.
So when I talk to evangelicals a lot about stuff like this, and evangelicals have a particular kind of view sometimes toward the role of culture, and they want to say, well, gospel is one thing and culture is something else. So the gospel should speak to culture, but they're not the same thing. When they hear you suggesting, but to understand what the gospel meant when Jesus said it had to be in a cultural context, does that ruffle some people? Where then they say, but do you? They wonder if you're suggesting that in the 21st century that gospel also has a cultural reality to it.
Yeah, occasionally people will say, well, okay, then how I express my Christian faith here in the 21st century probably has acquired some cultural things, and that's okay. When I do this from 2,000 years ago, from the ancient world, in front of large audiences, I find that people are delighted. But for them, it's almost like you are giving them secrets which they've never had access to.
All right.
Because the average Christian really doesn't have the tools to go back and understand what these ancient cultural things are. And some of them are really very nuanced. They're hard to get a hold of. I'll give you an example. This would be the equivalent of 1,000 years from now, in the future, a Chinese novelist is writing a story for his audience, and the story describes Americans in our era, children coming to the door in costumes dressed in black and orange.
Right.
And anybody living today would say, oh, it's Halloween.
Right.
But in a Chinese novel 1,000 years in the future...
Yeah, trick or treat didn't mean anything, right?
Trick or treat would mean nothing. One day, I asked a class of my students, I said, I want you guys to give me the most subtle, difficult sort of symbol of Easter that you can ever think of. And so they had fun with this, and they came up with, listen to this, marshmallow peeps.
Nice, yeah.
And I said, well, what? And there were the little marshmallow ducks and bunnies.
Yeah.
And I said, whenever you see those in pastels, that means Easter. And I thought, man, how would I ever explain that to someone in another culture?
Right.
It's so subtle. We all understand it, and we think it's cute. Anyway, in Jesus' world, 2,000 years ago, it was the very same thing. They had all kinds of fun symbols inside of Passover and tabernacles. and we just don't know him.
So would it be fair? I mean, this is sort of silly, but would it be fair to suggest that when Jesus makes a statement like "I am the living water," or "I am the good shepherd," or "I am the door," that people would have heard it then the way someone today might hear someone say that, Jesus would say, "I am the peep."
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, something like that.
And they would have been like, seriously, like I'm the reason for the season as opposed to the peeps or something like that. Hey, the co-host here on the show has a question for you. This is John.
Hey,
Hi, John.
Gary, you made a good job of establishing your point of why these things are necessary. But I do want to take umbrage with you for one thing. I mean, it's become more popular in the past 5 years or so with like N.T. Wright and to some degree with Rob Bell about describing the the backgrounds of these things. The things that I have a problem with then is that it seems to me that the gospel, Jesus' message, should be or was intended to be simple and accessible. And so what you're putting forth is that, well, no, you really need an expert, who's gone through this information about the Jewish festivals in order for you to truly understand. And so how comment on that really us common people don't have can't fully understand what's happening because we don't have knowledge of the Old Testament like you do.
Right. Well, it's a great question, John. I appreciate you raising it. Well, I think it's like this. The message of the Bible, the message of the gospel, is indeed timeless. And therefore, throughout the ages, every Christian in every generation can embrace that and understand that message. However, the original message is also embedded in a context. Let's do one in the Old Testament. When they talk about sacrifice and circumcision, we simply don't understand those two ideas without some backfill. Someone has got to help us understand, well, how did they sacrifice? Why did they sacrifice? How did they circumcise? Well, what does circumcision mean? So these are such foreign concepts to us. We really need some help to get our minds around them. So the very same thing is true when it comes to Jesus' message. The message of the gospel is indeed timeless, but it is not timeless in one respect because it is embedded in the culture.
It's better
Jesus
than timeless.
I am the
right?
great shepherd. If one doesn't understand shepherding, or if somebody has never seen a sheep in their life, they really can't understand what it means to be the great shepherd. Does that make sense?
I think it does, and I'm sure it does. John moved away here to he's shaking his head in many ways, This is we're listening to Gary Burge. Gary is the author of a book called Jesus and the Jewish